Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the Brecht Forum. I'm Andy Schwartz, and I'll be serving as tonight's moderator for a panel that I think is going to be very interesting and hopefully give us some good insight into the topic at hand here. I want to begin just by thanking our sponsors, the Brecht Forum, for hosting the event, and the Associated Musicians of Greater New York, Local 802 of the American Federation of Musicians, for donating the funding and helping with the promotion, and the panelists for donating their time. I think this is great. We're here to address the question of whether indie musicians, through collective action, can affect positive change in their world, and if so, through what kind of organization and with what kind of collective action. Indie musician is not an exact term. Everyone seems to have their own definition of that. For some it means musicians who record for indie labels. For others it means non-union musicians in general. And some people hold on to some connotation of it referring to indie rock. I'm going to let the panelists come up with the definitions as they will, but I'll only add that the indie label phenomenon really cuts through every genre of music. Chamber music, hip-hop, jazz, country music, progressive rock, metal, acoustic, and jazz, free jazz, whatever you want to title yourself, and not to mention all the musics that are made from all the corners of the globe that we enjoy in New York City. Perhaps more than any other place in the world, we have people that are performing in every imaginable performance venue, from the subway to a more dignified concert setting. But generally, these people are all bound together by the notion that they are independent artists. We've learned through an interesting paper that Stanley Aronowitz delivered some time ago, entitled "The Irony of the Indies," that our current situation has something to do with what he and Dr. David Harvey referred to as post-Fordist industrial restructuring. That's a mouthful. Or simply post-industrial restructuring. And I hope that the panel can explore a little bit what these two terms mean, but also what they apply to any new organizing that we may try to do as independent music artists. And perhaps how an analysis of the structure can be turned into some kind of practice for musicians working in indie label recordings and the related live performance venues and touring networks. On a personal note, I'll just tell you that I'm a musician with 34 years of experience in the New York City environment. I've performed in just about every possible field in this city, and I am also a member of the Executive Board of Local 802 of the American Federation of Musicians, representing the interests of some 8,000 plus musicians. The relevance of this discussion to the union, when I say the union, I'm referring to the American Federation of Musicians and to Local 802 in particular, is obvious. All major record labels are signatories of union contracts. What that means is that they're signers of agreements with the AFM, and that artists who sign with the majors are essentially told to become, if they're not already, members of the AFM, and then the labels are obligated to follow the terms of those contracts, which include things such as union scale payments to record, something that many indie artists never see the light of, and even more off the beaten track for them, the back-end payments that can add a lot of income to a musician's life. So almost none of the indie labels are signatories of any union agreements, and this extends also into the indie-related club and touring network. And were these normal times, the union would not be co-sponsoring any kind of event at the Brecht Forum. We'd be out in the clubs and in recording studios, getting musicians to sign authorization cards, calling for elections, holding negotiations, conducting strikes and boycotts, all to get benefits and better pay. But these are not normal times. And the tactics that have served the union well for more than 75 years, for traditional musicians, I say traditional, I mean those working in theaters and in symphony orchestras and the like, have not worked for indie artists, and those indie artists are the ones who increasingly dominate the music world, both in New York and around the world. So we suspect that some of the reasons for this are structural, and we know also, as union activists, we know that indie musicians cannot be asked to conform to structures that are mismatched to their reality. You cannot fit a square peg in a round hole. If your work does not match the contracts that are set up and the workplace environments, you can't make them mesh. So tonight, we're looking for alternatives. This panel is the first in a series of activities intended to chart a course toward improving working conditions for indie artists, and I thank you all for your interest in showing up here tonight. So let's begin. I'd like to start the discussion with the gentleman to my right here. Dr. Stanley Aronowitz is a professor of sociology, cultural studies, and urban education at City University of New York Graduate Center. He's also a veteran political activist and cultural critic, and an advocate for organized labor. He's the author of numerous books on class, culture, the sociology of science, and politics. Dr. Aronowitz is a former gubernatorial candidate on the Green Party slate, and his most recent book is entitled, if I'm correct in that, yes?
I haven't heard what you're going to say.
Okay, his most recent book is entitled Against Schooling, for an Education That Matters, and it was published in 2008. So welcome, Dr. Aronowitz. Stanley. Yeah. Stanley, several years ago, you delivered a report co-authored by Michael Roberts to Local 802 that'll serve us as a point of departure for tonight's panel. It was entitled The Irony of the Indies. And this report researched the nature of the deals between major labels and the so-called indie music labels, and the effect that they had on the record business and on artists. So maybe just to get us started, could you kind of review what that study was all about, and what is the irony in all of this? And I'll give you a mic to...
Thank you.
Do that.
Sometime earlier in this decade, probably 2000 maybe a little earlier, Local 802 asked me to perform a study to determine what the relationship was between indie labels and the major labels. Something had happened in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, that was very disturbing to the union. And what was disturbing was that increasingly the indie labels were overcoming the standard labels. We saw the beginning and end of labels such as RCA and Columbia and all that. And the union was afraid that notwithstanding the fact that it had a lot of contracts with the major labels, they were losing power in the industry, especially in the popular music industry. And so Mike Roberts and I just want to say Mike's book, which summarizes this stuff and goes well beyond what we did, will be out, I hope, in the spring. And it might be called The Irony of the Indies, I don't know, but it'll be by Duke University Press. Mike Roberts and I designed a study, did a series of interviews, did a lot of work to try to figure out what was going on. And our finding was very interesting because it violated all of the conventional understandings, both in traditional industries like automobiles, for example, or garments, as well as in music. So what we discovered was the continuity between what David Harvey, to my right, has characterized as a post-Fordist economic system, the correspondence between that in general and the music industry. Well, what was so interesting about it? While there were a lot of indie labels, and some of them go from selling 500 records to some thousands, none of them had signed agreements with the union. Many of the musicians were essentially not in the union. They were freelance musicians, unlike Andy and Mark Rebo over here, who were not engaged in those situations of trying to get union representation. Two things emerged from the study. I'm not going to go through the whole study because it's a big panel, and I think it's important to hear from everybody. Two things emerged from the study. In the first place, the irony of the indies was that they were not really independent. Increasingly, what was happening is that through the distribution system, which was controlled by the large companies in the record industry, the Sonys, etc., these indies were, if they wanted to go beyond mail order and selling to their friends and mothers and fathers, they would have to go through those distribution networks. And so while the major labels ostensibly did not control the indies, they in fact increasingly did. Those indies that became well-known and became subject to the mass market were to a large extent in the thrall of the big labels. It was a typical case of outsourcing. The production was done by the musicians, and sometimes they owned the independent label. Sometimes they were part of they were not the producers. But the distribution and most of the profit really still went to the large companies in the record industry. Meanwhile, it was becoming much more difficult to enforce the contract because of that situation. That was the first thing that we discovered. The second thing that we discovered, and this is what did not really get into a study. Mark and I have talked about doing this study. Maybe one day Local 802 will extend our support to be able to do this, that this was now an international phenomenon. That is to say, global capitalism was not simply confined to garments and automobiles and traditional goods, but global capitalism was making its way into finance capital was making its way into the record, not the record industry, but into the music industry. And the third conclusion, and that meant that people in France, people in Germany, people in Belgium, people in England, musicians were facing exactly the same problems as musicians were facing in the United States, so that we are now talking about a global industry. That was clear from the way in which this post-industrial, post-Fordist mechanism was operating. It could not stay on the national boundaries. I would add one thing, and then I'm going to stop. And that is that there were several of things that we also discovered that were really alarming. And I say alarming because, as Andy has said, I've been a union organizer. I've been an elected official of a union, different unions and different levels all my life. The union was fast asleep. I don't mean 802 alone, but the AFM, the American Federation of Musicians, was asleep. And one of the reasons that they were having trouble, and it's not the main reason, but it is an important reason, in fact, in the end, it may be one of the most important, was that they did not consider popular music real music. And we found that a former president, for example, of the American Federation of Musicians, Herman Kennan, once said, "This is trash. Anybody can play popular music. Anybody can be the Beatles. Anybody can be the Stones. Anybody can be, Creedence Clearwater Revival." I mean, come on. That was an attitude. that to a large extent prevented them from really taking a careful look at what that industry was about and who these people were that were being moved into this global network of finance capital. And the fourth thing that was very, so that the aesthetic dimension of this economic development was a very important reason that the union did not take aggressive action, although it tried in many instances. And I'm not here to bash the union. It was a problem. No, I'm not here to bash the union because I know the problems that they faced. But that was one of the problems. They thought classical music, they had to be dragged kicking and screaming into jazz, in bygone years. So now they were, beginning to wake up to the issue of rock and roll and hip hop and heavy metal and all those forms. And the final thing which I want to say is that our study, which I think in broad contours still holds, does not hold so much for the particulars that we found. We interviewed executives and musicians and all kinds of people. Our study holds to this extent that economic arrangements, A, and B, technological transformation in the nature of the way in which music is produced is really one of the most important issues facing musicians. They have to understand, the unions as well as the organizations of musicians generally, and the musicians themselves have to understand that nothing is forever, that the world is constantly changing, and as Mark said to me a few minutes ago before we went on this stage, he said that the technology is moving so fast, as people can download music. Why should there be records? The record may be a thing of the past, or it may be a particular public utility, as he said. But the point is that we have to become, and I learned this a long time ago, we have to become deeply knowledgeable about science and technology. We cannot simply take traditional trade union procedures and so on for granted. We have to understand the relationship between the political economy and science and technology. Otherwise, the union movement as a whole, and the musicians' union particularly, is going to find itself a little space in the Smithsonian Museum. The world has changed. We've heard the descriptions from everybody on this panel in different ways. But the unions still operate in the old world. And the law, that is the labor relations law, with its Taft-Hartley amendments, are not in the interest of the workers or of the unions. We're getting to the point where the major problem, and I think David Harvey put it very well, when we have to think about whole new strategies of organizing, that these strategies have to figure out how to circumvent the law, and on occasion use the law, as in the case of injunctions, as Jeff said. But the circumvention of the law might be the creation of new kinds of organizations which, in tandem with unions, could actually do something. The problem that we face, though, is that, and I just want to give you some other kinds of experience, the Taxi Workers Alliance and the Domestic Workers United are trying to become unions. Now, I'm not going to say I can second guess them, but I have a suspicion. This is a hunch, okay? An educated hunch. That's a mistake. And that the Taxi Workers Alliance was able to shut down Kennedy Airport. How did they do that? They put their taxis in front of the egress and ingress to Kennedy Airport. Nobody could get in. They've had some struggles like that. Once they become a union, they can't do that, because the law stinks, and we're a long way at this point, given the political environment within which we live, that we're going to be able to change the law to be good for unions. I actually want to suggest that, without being too radical, that maybe we ought to completely ignore as much as possible working in and through the law. That direct action is precisely what we need right now. I want to say one or two more things. Thank you. But this is very, very, this is hard work, because the habit, the habituation, you used the word, Matt, of consciousness of the union leadership And if the union movement is we got to go to elections, we got to get majorities, that's a second question. What Jeff said, and you listen to this carefully, and what David Harvey said before that, is that you can go in with 3 workers here and 10 workers there, and if you have a position that you're not going to be considered a union in the traditional way, you might get further than if you try to be a union in the traditional way. We have a ideology that prevails in the United States, and I'm sure most of the world, that A, technology is neutral, and B, and that means that ultimately we all benefit from it. And the fact is, it's not true. And it can be demonstrated, and I'm one of the people who've written a lot about the destructive character of technology. Now, the technologies that are employed by monopolies like the big music industry are really oriented to fucking over the musicians and generally speaking, the workers. What we don't have, and I'm not talking about breaking machines right away. That may come down the road, but what we don't have very much of is a public conversation about whether the mergers and the reorganization, as you described, Nan, of the radio industry, for example, and the technologies that are circumventing the rights of musicians are destroying the culture. I believe that we can see a discernible decline of artistic culture in the United States. I think for every Cecil Taylor in the field of jazz, which I know something about, there are many, many people who are playing anthology. And if you go to the clubs, as I do...
They're placeholders.
That's exactly right. If you go to the clubs in New York City, if you go to Jazz Standard and places like that, it is the rare musician, they're all very competent and they're all very good, there's a rare musician that even has reached the level of Coltrane. I mean, in terms of the writing.
Well, yeah, obviously. That's not a surprise.
No, I don't mean in quality. I mean in
I can, Stan.
No. You know what I mean, Mark. All they're doing is placeholders, and one of the reasons is because the conditions of the musicians do not permit them to have creative possibility.
One of the reasons is the spokesperson for jazz is this placeholder.
I know, and he's a very good.
He's a very good musician,
He's a
but
very
he's a
good.
placeholder.
But he's a very good musician. He plays Haydn's trumpet concerto gorgeously, but he doesn't have any talent in jazz. His name is, of course, Wynton Marsalis.
I'm sorry. I didn't say it.
I'm gonna jump one seat over and ask Mark Ribot to speak now. Let me just mention that Mark is a musician and activist who has maintained both a long-standing commitment to New York's downtown creative music and free jazz scenes, and also recorded and performed with people like Tom Waits, Elvis Costello, Marianne Faithfull, with Robert Plant and Alison Krauss on their recent Grammy-winning recording, and many others. As an activist, though, he's been directly involved in some of the few successful rank-and-file-led collective actions involving non-union, indie label-oriented musicians. He's been involved in the Noise Action Coalition, the Knitting Factory Recording Artist Campaign, and other rank-and-file organizing efforts in and around Local 802. So I give you Mark Ribot here. Mark, you've argued in discussion and through a proposal to the 802 Executive Board and in some unpublished writing that a form of unionism, an outsourced indie union, could potentially create leverage in situations where traditional structures and strategies have failed. So what do you mean by this, and how could it work? You want to grab a mic there?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you. I want to go back and elaborate a little bit on what Stanley was saying first before I get around to the indie union bit. First of all, as Stanley was saying, there's our analogies between what's happened in the music industry and other industries. And I know this is a strange thought for many of my musician friends, because we like to see I don't like this thing. We like to see ourselves as completely anomalous and original, in the words of John Lennon, as clever and classless and free. And so I was surprised myself when I started reading some of what was going on, some of the things Stanley and David Harvey were writing, to find that there were in fact direct parallels between what was happening in music and what was happening in other industries. For example, a lot of people know that, for example, that Detroit right now is a wasteland because the car companies started to outsource different parts of their production. What used to be all located together in one big factory and represented by one big industrial union very successfully, was taken apart, and parts of the operation were sold off to separate corporations. They were outsourced to other corporations that were oftentimes, although not always, located further away, sometimes in other countries, but not necessarily. The main point is that they were owned by separate corporations. And the reason this was done was because once they were sold to a separate corporation, the parent corporation, if was protected, was legally protected from labor action. In other words, if you sold off the brake drum building part of the car building operation, and the people didn't like the way they were being treated in the brake drum factory, they couldn't go on strike against General Motors. They could only go on strike against Joe's brake drum factory. Why? Because there's a law. The secondary boycott provision of the Taft-Hartley amendment to the national. Thank you. I knew it was a long.
I thought I'd give you a hand.
Anyways, and what I was surprised to learn from reading Stanley's report and some other things was that this is in fact what happened. The analogous situation in music was with the indie labels. Now, I was surprised to learn this. One reason that I was surprised was because there has been an enormous amount of hype to the contrary. Indie labels have been presented, have self-advertised as the politically progressive movement of our time. You know, the ostensible reason for there being an indie label is because the material is so radical, so aesthetically or politically radical, that those big capitalist major labels wouldn't touch it, you know? And, well, I have to say, as in my own experience, I already knew that to be a crock. I mean, frankly, I've worked on aesthetically and politically radical records for the major labels, and I've worked on really pieces of garbage for indies. And I've worked on, not that, you know, I've done some great records, I hope, for indies and some lousy ones for majors too. But I'm just saying, it doesn't matter. You know, I haven't seen it. I mean, what do Linton Kwesi Johnson, Rage Against the Machine, Cecil Taylor, John Zorn, and me have in common? Give up all major label releases. You know, so, I mean, yes, major labels do impose a form of corporate discipline. That is, they impose 24-bit and, 24-bit recording and a piece of plastic in the same size for every single one called a CD. Beyond that, they're happy to sell, you know, to whatever niche markets they can find. They don't care. But the hype surrounding the difference that I did find in my own experience between doing indie label records and major label records is, well, the main difference is that when I start negotiating what I'm going to get paid on a major label record, it starts from union scale, which is quite high, whereas when I start negotiating what I'm going to get paid on an indie label record, it starts from zero, and usually with somebody whining, "Oh man, we don't have a lot of money, you know, we're just an indie label." Even though, you know, I mean, the joke is sometimes 10 minutes actually. That's what I understand. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. I'm
Bad guy.
Oh, okay, good. I will get towards wrapping it up then. Anyways, so anyways, I found that the rationalization, the aesthetic rationalization, was the opposite of what was happening economically. Economically, basically, it was another, the much vaunted indie label movement is another name for union busting. And I don't mean, by the way, to do any discredit. There have been very many selfless, dedicated, good people working on both sides of the label thing who've done good work. I'm not trying to say indie label's bad, major label's good. I'm trying to say that I'm trying to encourage people to look past the hype and look at a structural relationship. Now, the other thing, as Stanley was saying, is that the indies are not indies. They are outsourced assets of the record industry. The big money is still in distribution. The big money is still in distribution, and to some extent, the indie label people are saying, we don't have a lot of money, are right. Because within their corporation, on their set of books, they no longer have access to the profits of their distributors. That's what changed when the majors stopped incorporating indies and started to distribute them instead of buy them up and own them. So it's there's a legal barrier to going to unions that prevents them from going where the money is. If a union targets a distributor, or if a union targets a corporation that's not the direct corporation being, protested again or struck, and they violate the secondary boycott provision, they can have their assets seized, their pension, I think even the pension fund seized. They can have the officers and other people arrested. So what's happened is that music and other industries have used this structural trick to insulate more and more of their money from unionism, and that's why my friends and I spend all day fighting with our girlfriends about, how come the apartment is too small, whereas 40 years ago, people who worked at our level in New York City made a lot of bread. Next.
Wow.
In the market, there's going to be rent seeking. It's not going to be
the
different.
internet is more than just the market. And one thing I haven't heard so far is discussion about our connectivity with fans, and as far as our support. And what I most appreciate about the internet is not so much the online distribution, because that really is nickel and diamond. You're talking about iTunes and using TuneCore to get here, there, and whatever. But it's really like 99 cents here, 99 cents there, whatever. But what I enjoy about the internet is that I can connect and engage with my fans where they have my back.
Okay,
They
well,
no, it's about creating a culture. It's not about just me and my music.
but
It's
sorry to
about
ask an
culture.
embarrassing question.
Huh?
Sorry to ask an embarrassing question. But how do you get paid?
I get paid by T-shirts. I get paid by travel. I have not traveled yet outside this country on my own dime. Okay? I get paid by collaborating with people. I get paid. Right now, sales actually has always been the latter part of how we got paid as musicians.
Really?
Yes. I'm not talking about publishing. okay? But like Dave Matthews, he makes most of his money. He's big, he sells out, stadiums, what have you. And he gets his fee. But where he makes his money are t-shirts. Freaking t-shirts.
People-
But I'm saying you can't discard that. That's a fact.
I don't discard
I
it,
know,
but
so it's like to focus on the internet is just this place where can we make money or not? It's just about the sales. It's not just about the sales, it's about connecting with your fans, it's about creating culture. And in that culture, there's a world of money there. That's what it's about.
well,
Okay. Thank you, Mark. I want to come back now to one chair to Dr. David Harvey. Dr. Harvey is a distinguished professor at the City University of New York Graduate Center and the director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. He's the author of 16 books, including The Limits to Capital, The Condition of Postmodernity, and A Brief History of Neoliberalism. The book version of his online lectures on Marx is to be published by Verso Press as a companion to Marx's Capital. So Dr. Harvey, welcome. The transformation of our industry is not peculiar to music. It's symptomatic of a much larger postmodern condition that has been accompanied by a weakening of power of unions across the board. You've written in The Condition of Postmodernity that the kind of economic and labor restructuring that has occurred over the last 3 decades makes collective action by workers difficult. Can you elaborate a little on what this means and how it might appear in our industry, in our music industry?
I'm at a big disadvantage here that I really don't know too much about the music industry. And I accepted to come here because I think it's a fascinating question, and I'm here to learn rather than to tell you anything about what to do in your own industry. But I do have a few observations about some of the transformations that have occurred over the last 30-odd years. One as background is this, that capitalism is supposed to be about competition, but actually capitalists hate competition. They love monopoly. Okay, so they do everything they possibly can to get away from competition and into a world of monopoly. Now, one of the ways in which I think things have really hotted up over the last 30 years is that they've decided that one of the areas where they really want to monopolize is in the field of intellectual property rights. And so the first thing I'd say to any cultural producer is watch out for your intellectual property rights, because they'll thieve it from you if they possibly can. And there's a lot of chatter amongst the capitalist classes these days of almost turning the world, as far as they're concerned, into a rentier world. They just own the intellectual property rights and live off that, and not bother to produce anything or do anything. They just simply take the rents and the royalties. Now, when I mentioned this thing about monopoly, one of the ways in which they've been pursuing the idea of monopoly is, of course, by name branding and product differentiation. But one of the reasons why, if you like, the cultural industries are a particular target for this activity is because in the cultural industries you can start to make claims about authenticity, originality, non-replicability, uniqueness. In other words, the cultural industries are full of activities which lend themselves to being monopolized if you can brand them right and capture them right. So I think one of the things that has happened over the last 30 years is that capitalists have run out of things to produce and to make, and so they've been raiding the cultural industries like crazy, including, of course, the museum culture. I mean, when I first arrived in Baltimore in 1969, there were about 2 crappy museums around. And now there's about 50, museums of everything. I don't know what, One day we'll have a museum of capitalism, which shows what capitalism once was like, or maybe there'll be a museum of competition to show once upon a time there was competition, So the cultural industries have become embroiled, if you like, in, a whole kind of way in which there's appropriations going on, and it's what I tend to refer to as accumulation by dispossession. People are going to dispossess people of their cultural heritage. They're going to dispossess people of their originality and their creativity by converting it into some form of intellectual property rights. And internationally, of course, as Stan mentioned, this has become critical. I mean, one of the big reasons why the US will stick with the WTO, no matter how many negative rulings it gets in terms of its own practices in agriculture or steel or whatever it is because of the TRIPS agreement, which is the intellectual property rights part of it. So this is, if you like, one of the big transitions that's occurred. And of course, in so doing, it's also connected with what was originally posed, the whole kind of movement in terms of subcontracting, temporary labor, non-union labor, all of the kind of transitions that occurred from the mid-1970s onwards. And I was in Europe this summer, and the French and the Germans have come up with a word for this, which is called, it's a new class, and it's called the precariat. And actually, I can kind of see I don't like it too much, but on the other hand, you can see what they're talking about. People who are engaging in precarious labor, no security, no benefits, nothing. I mean, this is what I'm hearing around this table. This is what all you guys are, you're part of the precariat, okay. Now, when you want to organize, and there was a conference in Berlin actually about how to organize the precariat, and the proletariat's disappeared. I mean, at least it has in Europe. It's all gone to China, so what they do in China is another matter. But, so how do you organize this particular labor force? And there's a lot of desperation about that sort of thing. And it seemed to me that actually this is a point where we've got to watch out for what you might call a certain conservatism within the union movement and within thinking, even in left circles. That actually something like the National Labor Relations Board, all of that stuff, is a hindrance right now to organizing. I mean, I recall when we were in a living wage campaign in Baltimore, and we were going to the university and saying you should be a living wage institution. And suddenly the lawyer came out and said, we can't talk to you because you're not authorized to speak for the workers. There's been no checkoff, all this kind of stuff. And we said, we don't want to speak for the workers, we're speaking for us. And what you're doing is absolutely fucking outrageous. And so just get over it and speak to us. And they refused to speak to us, and we actually then had a sit-in to make sure they did speak to us. Now, the point about this is that actually trying to go the union path is maybe not the way to go. And there's a group in Baltimore called Baltimore Workers United, which took on the stadium authorities with the cleaners and the peanut vendors and all this kind of stuff. But instead of calling themselves a union, they call themselves a human rights organization. Now, I'm very nervous about this, but on the other hand, you can see strategically why that made a difference. It made a difference because the human rights organization could bring together everybody who's concerned about that, not just the workers, but people in the community. And they worked for about 4 or 5 years, and then they won, and they won by a very simple strategy. They organized a bunch of people from various communities around the city who had become concerned about them, and they threatened a hunger strike outside the stadium. And the governor went berserk and kind of rushed down there and said, you can't go on hunger strike outside the Orioles Stadium. I mean, this is what kind of image is that going to give us about Baltimore? People lying there dying of starvation. I mean, this just can't do this. But the point was that the people on the hunger strike, only 3 of them were the workers. The rest were people from the community. They had people from very different organizations, which suggests that actually if you want to do something in the music industry, you've probably got to get a far broader coalition of forces behind you, because you're not going to be able to do it on your own. And actually there are several organizations around right now. I mean, we're going to hear about the restaurant workers, I think, in a minute. You're going to talk about that. Domestic workers are organizing in New York City. What would happen if all the musicians got together with domestic workers and had a big concert on this? And said, look, all the precarious workers are going to have this big concert down in Times Square, and we're going to actually do something for all of us. Now, there is some sort of getting together in the city. There's a group called the sort of, Right to the City group, which is an alliance which is trying to pin together some things. But it does seem to me that actually this is a moment where we really need to rethink what organising is about, how it's going to proceed, and maybe put behind us the idea that, you know, the images that came from that world of factory labour with secure union jobs, all those kinds of things, and actually talk about forms of organisation that have, if you like, a different mode of organising, but also move towards much grander coalitions, because I think it seems to me that that is about the only way in which you can get things to work. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey. That was great. Changing direction a little bit, as Dr. Harvey just mentioned, I want to introduce somebody from the Restaurant Opportunities Center of New York. New forms of organizing do seem to be emerging, and among the most interesting of these has been the Restaurant Opportunities Center of New York, or ROC New York, ROC-NY, which has been able to function as sort of an outsourced or flexible union, using its status outside the official restaurant union structure to great advantage in getting difficult to organize restaurants to sign union contracts and redress other grievances. So I'd like to introduce Jeff Mansfield, ROC New York. Jeff got involved with the center in 2006 while he was a student at the Union Theological Seminary in New York City by participating in prayer vigils for workers on the sidewalk outside their restaurants. He's now a full-time organizer on ROC New York staff and is pursuing ordination in the United Church of Christ. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
Can you give us a brief overview of ROC New York's work, and then I'll have a couple.
Absolutely. The one thing that I just want to correct is that ROC New York does not get restaurants to sign union contracts. We get them to agree to things that are completely outside of any type of union contract. We're not a union in any way, and we don't actually unionize the workers, but we do organize the workers to achieve the types of victories that they might be able to achieve if they were a part of the union. But we do it through different methods, completely different methods. And that's an important, really important point, because one of the things that the bosses and the owners have come after us on is saying that we're a union, and therefore trying to make some of the things that we do illegal. And undoubtedly, that's something that musicians are going to have to confront too if you start organizing outside of the union and try to organize in these ways. One thing, I'm just curious about how many people here are musicians. Okay, and four. And so obviously this is something that deeply touches everybody in this room. I'm not a musician, and I don't want to tell musicians what they should do, but I will talk about ROC New York and let you know exactly what sorts of things we've had success with. The key thing that we do at ROC New York is that we organize. If we weren't organizing, we would have absolutely nothing. And that means really going in there and getting to know workers and organizing them, doing house visits, getting people involved in as many possible ways as we possibly can, finding out who they are and what they care about and what's going on in their life, and do you have health insurance, and how are your kids doing, and do you think you're going to be able to send them to school, and what happens if they get sick, and what happens if you get sick and you need to take a day off, but you're going to get fired if you try and take a sick day, and all these types of issues. Really, trying to find what makes people angry and getting them to come out and take a stand in collective action together. The most important thing we do is we realize that as much as allies are absolutely going to be a part of this, that the people who are most affected by what's going on in the restaurant industry, the people who are most affected by what's going on in the music industry, have to be directly involved and have to be taking a leadership role in that. So musicians have to be leading the organizing efforts to transform their industry. And that means going out and making friends and making allies, getting together with the domestic workers and saying, hey, what can we do? Getting together with restaurant workers and saying, hey, what can we do together? But it definitely means that you all, as musicians, you have to be the ones who are willing to step up and say, I'm going to be a leader, I'm going to take the risks, and I'm going to do the work for my industry. At Rock New York, we organize in around 3 basic ways. The first way is workplace justice campaigns. We organize in restaurants, and we don't do hot shop organizing. So as like workers come to us and say, we're really angry and we want to organize. We absolutely help them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be one of our big campaigns, because we have to be very strategic. We have limited resources. So we actually go after the big guys. We go after the guys who we want to go and get. The people who have the big name and the celebrity status, but they're not a unionized restaurant. And we will go and we will organize in that restaurant, find out what the problems are, and get the angry people to decide that they're going to finally take a stand about what's going on in their restaurant. So I can imagine something similar, possibly happening in the music industry. If there is a particular club or a venue or a recording studio that is, doing things that are either illegal or just plainly immoral and not good for musicians, to organize the musicians who are, using that club, using that recording studio to have some sort of collective action to raise the standards of that place. The other thing we do is we organize the people who are doing the right thing. So there are restaurants in New York City that are doing the right thing. They're paying their workers according to the law, and they're going, most importantly, above and beyond the law. It's very important for us to get those people on our side and to be our allies, because they are the proof that our vision of a restaurant industry where everyone is making a living wage and has health insurance and has paid sick days and are able to own property and send their kids to school, they're the proof that that vision is possible. And so we need to reward them. And when an owner comes out and speaks on behalf of workers and says, you know what, workers need a raise in the minimum wage. I actually pay my workers far more than minimum wage, and it profits my business. It's a good business strategy, and all of New York City should be doing it. That's an incredibly powerful tool to add to the workers' voices. The other thing that we do that might be helpful for musicians is we do research about exactly what is going on in the restaurant industry. Basically, before Rock New York really started researching the restaurant industry, there wasn't any hard scientific data about what was going on. Restaurant workers knew it sucked. And I've heard, I mean, there's some research that's been done in the music industry as well, but really getting the hard data of how many workers have health insurance, in the restaurant industry. What's the medium wage that workers are making on the job? Who's making below minimum wage? Who's getting paid sick days and who's not? What is the health and safety like on the job? Getting these actual statistics helps us to organize folks and helps us to then go on and legislate and push the public and push public policymakers and politicians to create laws that actually benefit restaurant workers. So in the same way, this is research and policy work that is in a large part directed by restaurant workers, where restaurant workers are directly involved. Again, it has to be the people who are closest to the problem that are actually taking a lead in fixing it, or else it's going to probably not get fixed the way we actually want it to get fixed. So when restaurant workers do this type of research, we can use it for the betterment of the entire restaurant industry. And that's what Rock New York is here for, to improve the restaurant industry for workers. The types of things that we've done in our campaigns, where we organize workers, for instance, we organize workers, in Fireman Hospitality Group, 250 workers, or against celebrity chef Daniel Boulud, who is discriminating against workers. We'll get them, a nice settlement for the wages that have been stolen from them, the tips that have been stolen from them, the sexual harassment they've suffered on the job. And I see a lot of people shaking their heads because I know a lot of musicians are restaurant workers too, so you all have dealt with this, I know. Sexual harassment that they've suffered on the job and racial discrimination that they've suffered on the job. But we always go above and beyond and make sure that we're transforming that restaurant into a dream restaurant where we're getting HR departments, 2 weeks paid vacation, job security for 5 years, paid sick days, a living wage, things that this restaurant never dreamed that they were ever going to have to give, and now they do. I think I could probably talk just a little bit more about lessons that we've learned as restaurant workers and how it might,
Please do.
how it
Yeah.
might affect, how it could work for just in the last couple of minutes for musicians. One of the things that we did as restaurant workers is we had a vision of what the restaurant industry should look like. And so what we did is, we went out and we started our own restaurant called Colors. And it's down in the village, East Village, 417 Lafayette Street. Colors International Cocktail Company. It's a fine dining restaurant and a bar where it's the first worker-owned cooperative restaurant in the United States. We opened it in 2005. And it's still there. So we got rid of the boss and had the workers come in and actually own their own business. I could imagine, this would be something that musicians could do as well, or a union or a group that's operating sort of para-union, is, opening up your own small club where where musicians who come to perform there are not going to just be getting tips, but they're going to be getting paid according to the law and according to what every musician wants, and making that business a success. So it can become a model for all of New York City to say, hey, look, you don't have to be doing it this way, so don't tell everybody that the only way that you can afford to have these musicians come in for you is just to offer them tips and publicity. That it's in fact possible to pay musicians to come and play and to be profitable while doing it. I think also, it would benefit, musicians to really be researching, what is a musician's life like in New York City, and to publish those results. What is the healthcare issues that you have, the debt issues, how much money you're actually making, how many musicians who classify themselves as musicians are actually working full-time, playing the music that they want to play. These sorts of things will really help to benefit you to know where you're going in the future. And then also, I think really important is diversity. To make sure that the movement has been very important to us, that it be a movement of everybody who's working in the restaurant industry, in every position, every race, both genders, immigrant and citizen and resident, undocumented and documented. It really has to be a movement that represents everybody. That's the only way that we can really be strong. So it has to be a movement across all genres of music and all cultures. Because, there are so many different cultures and genres in New York City playing and producing and recording music. And it has to be a movement of all those people together, all as indie or however you want to describe yourselves, but you're all in the same boat. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff.
And I'm sorry, I wanted to direct a question to Jeff, because I was listening with great interest to what you were saying. You said that you went at, the ROC went after some of the major, you didn't just go after the marginal places just because people were angry. You went after the big places. So my question to you is were you guys able to succeed when the regular restaurant union failed, and how did your structure as not being a union give you an advantage to succeed where the regular union failed?
Well, I wouldn't say, Mark, that it was that we were able to succeed where the union had failed. It's just that we were able to operate where the union was unable to operate.
How?
And the reason is because in New York City you've got right now probably 220,000 restaurant workers, and you've got less than 1% of them that are actually unionized. And the union has a very specific job that they do, which is a great job for the workers that they're able to do it for, but they simply do not have the capacity to do it for 210 or 220,000 workers in the city. The amount of organizing and the amount of just resources it would take to go after, you think about how many restaurants are in New York City. There's probably 15,000, food and drink places in New York City. going after each one of you have to go after each one of those individually, because, or, there are a few of them that are, they're not all independent, but it's maybe, 10 restaurants here, 15 restaurants there. It just takes a long, long time. And so the union is going after the really, 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 really big ones, where they can get 100, 200 workers at a time in a hotel, a big corporate cafeteria, or a place where the workers, take the initiative on their own and organize on their own and go to the union. But that leaves out about more than 99% of workers still, all that work that they're doing, and they're working hard. So we come along to go after those places that the union just can't get to. And the union, and we have a good understanding that, we're working for the same things in the same movement, and I think the union really sees what ROC does as being, something that actually prepares the way for more and better unionization and sort of institutionalization of the types of work that we do. And we do have some benefits in terms of not being a union. There are some things that are a disadvantage, but some of the things that are an advantage is that, for instance, we go into a restaurant and maybe we get 10% of the workers in that restaurant. Let's say there's, they've got about 80 employees and we get, 8 or 10 or 15 of them. That's way less than a union could ever, make a change in that place. They've got to get, they have to have a vote, and they've got to have, 60 or something, have to have a much larger than majority percent of the people to, vote for the union. We can go in with 10%, 15%, 20% of the people, and we can affect the change through other means besides a union vote. So we'll, start, we'll do protests, we'll do a demand letter with a protest, a lawsuit, so we get lawyers involved and the workers organizing. So then the workers themselves are making the demands on their own place. And we can actually, when they finally settle, because they're so sick of us protesting and dragging them through court, and they say, fine, we'll finally settle, now it's a court order. Now everything that they've agreed to, that we've come together and we've agreed to, it's a court order, and they have to do it. It's not a union contract, there's no collective bargaining, but we're able to do it with much smaller numbers. The other thing, for instance, that we're able to do is we're able to do things like secondary boycotts and protest.
Okay.
We can protest for the rest of our lives if we want to. If the workers decide to do it, we can just sit out there and protest all day long and do prayer vigils and hand out flyers that have all of your health code violations on them. We'll do anything that we have to do.
These are advantages that ROC has, that if a union did the same action, they would get an injunction.
Right. Obviously, union can't do secondary boycotts. In New York, you can't protest for more than 30 days, and there's all kinds of all these types of issues that we're able to circumvent those, because there's really no laws regulating how or where we organize, except that we can't go for collective bargaining rights, and if it looks like we are, we're in trouble.
Stanley, you want to? Colson. She comes to us from the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. It's a very long-standing organization. She's a musician. She's an AACM member, a former officer, an indie label owner, an arts consultant, and an educator. Iqua, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about the AACM, its legacy, and its artists, and perhaps relay some of what your own experiences have been working in our increasingly indie environment. Tall order.
Hi, everybody. Just listening to everybody else, I have all, been jotting down notes. But, well, I always kind of define myself as a 60s child. And the stuff that went on in the 60s, everybody knows about that. So when I decided I was going to major in music, I went to one of the best music schools in the country, Northwestern. I knew I wanted to basically sing jazz. But my mindset, of course, coming out of Chicago, which is a great place for coalescing and coming together, was that I was going to go here and get this, music education, but I was going to be a jazz artist. Well, they didn't have a jazz department, neither did anybody else at the time. But because of my mindset it's no wonder that the person that I became closest to and ultimately married as one of the 6 architects of the takeover of Northwestern University's bank in 1967. When we performed in Chicago 2 summers ago, the former head of the SDS came to the concert and stopped my husband in the aisle and said, you know, I was head of the SDS when you all took over that bank, and, you know, we were outside and we had your back. And, you know, Steve said, yeah, you know, he says, do you know it's gone down in history as one of, because they took over the bank. Other people were sitting in the president's office. They went into the building, all 90 African-American students, which wasn't many at Northwestern, went into the building and held it for 2 or 3 days. And when they tried to rush in with the National Guard and everything, they found out that they had gone through the underground tunnels and chained the doors, and, you know, I mean, they really did it right. And so they eventually met their demands. No one was harmed. Now, of course, years later, they shot people at, I think it was Kent State, and you kind of knew, okay, we have to come up with some other devices. But that's where our heads were. I'm, you know, married to this person now for more years than I care to admit. I'm old. And our motto, and we've raised 2 sons, is self-reliance, hard struggle. So when we were coming out of college, we migrated into what was then a very young organization, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. And the idea is this: you're an artist. As both of our parents told us, you all are marrying each other, clearly. You know, art has to come through you. It's not necessarily a rational choice. You're an artist, you've got to be an artist, you've got to figure out how to be an artist. And the AACM was all about that. We're going to play our music, we're going to produce our concerts, we're going to just do our thing. You know, Charlie Mingus can be heard on one of his albums saying, could you stop with the cash register and selling the drinks? You know, he's in the middle of the club, and it's like, we're trying to play some music here. And you all are selling drinks. So it's of that mindset that we went into alternative spaces, came together and created ideas together, listened to other people's ideas, talked about composition, everything from, you know, packaging and presentation to alternative notation in musical composition. Chicago is a great place for that. I'm an unabashed fan of our president, who grew up, I grew up in the neighborhood from where he came, but more importantly, as I was just talking to Hassan about, Chicago is a place where people can come together, but it still has that big city energy. And so the AACM did what we do, and eventually it began to influence, you know, we can say the post-Coltrane era of jazz. Obviously, as often happens with jazz, very well known in Europe, playing in small alternative spaces in Chicago. Our generation of the AACM, of which George Lewis and Chico Freeman, my husband Steve Colson, and others are members, Kyle Elzabaro, Douglas Ewart, we pushed forward with that international piece, having International Summerfest in Chicago that brought people from around the world to Chicago, which is where we were creating this music and creating this organization. In 1980, my husband and I started our own label, Silver Sphinx, just to do our music. Other labels came along, we recorded for them. He's done stuff for everyone from Sony to Evidence and whomever, but we keep Silver Sphinx going because we're able to do our music, and you know, we come together with a lot of like-minded artists. Somebody that we collaborate with quite frequently, Amiri Baraka, has just finished doing our liner notes for our next CD, and he is a person who feels, as we do, that art is political. It is a reflection, you know, as I tell my students and teachers, you know, eventually I went on and got a master's in public administration and arts administration, and once I got up in the classes, the people, the instructors were like, what are you doing here? Well, I'm getting my rubber stamp because I'm, you know, working in schools and doing development and so on and so forth, but we had done the work over 20, 25 years in the AACM just out of necessity of having our art done. A visual artist more often than not, can create in their space. Performing artists, more often than not, want other performing artists. That's not to say visual artists don't draw in energy from other artists. So, you know, when you're looking at, it depends upon what kind of career path you take. I have very close friends who are fabulous jazz artists, innovators, composers, but they also work in pits on Broadway and get called into big sessions, and the union serves them well in that regard. They stay in there, they pay union dues. So there's others who are working independently. They're getting paid what the union people are demanding and more, and, but they choose to be independent. Now, if you have an independent label, of course, the rub is you do want it to be distributed. And if you are an artist, you have very little time to sit around and do a whole lot of organizing, figuring out who the distributors are, calling on the phone, doing all that. So you are looking for some kind of relationship that can serve or assist you in getting your music distributed around the world. When we first did our label, distributors, there was a move for independent jazz and independent jazz labels in 1980. So people came to us, and suddenly our small label was in Japan or Europe or other places, in the United States that we may or may not have gone or known that were there. So it is something to consider. When you think as an artist, are you going to be a placeholder or are you going to be an innovator? If you're going to be an innovator, as the hip-hop people have shown us most recently, not to refer to them as hip-hop people, but the people doing hip-hop. Don't want to say those people, but the artists who have developed hip-hop as a great art form, they just did it. And they were written off, just like Little Richard and Louis Armstrong, paying him with a fifth of whatever they paid him a fifth of with. It wasn't money, but he died a millionaire because he figured out, this is my art, and I'm going to figure out a way to pull it together. Ellington, Coltrane, these people have left a legacy tied up that their families can, and that goes to intellectual property and rights. You have the Monk family, the Gershwins, the Hammersteins fighting it out for the copyright to retain their intellectual property and succeeding. So I think as artists, you want to be, we're trying to be wiser and know more about how to create while retaining the rights to our art and figure out how to distribute it on a global scale.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that, as I mentioned earlier in my introductory remarks, the one thing that we need to embrace in this New York environment is that all artists, regardless of the style of music that they choose to devote their lives to, have an incredible common interest in bettering themselves, and it's my hope that those of us in these disparate fields will find a way to conjoin, will find a way to assist each other and collaborate to make the whole overall so much better and richer. And I think the AACM is a fantastic template for such an endeavor. So I'm very, very pleased that Ikwe could be with us today, and I honor her for all the efforts that she and her founders of the AACM have managed over the years. I want to move on to Hassan Salam. He is an MC and producer. He's released 2 albums independently. MTV UK currently has his video entitled 15 Minutes in Rotation. He's won 2 Underground Music Awards. He works with youth and helps put together food and clothing drives with the Fifth Column. As I just said, I think it's really vital that we join together and not see ourselves as isolated due to style or due to genre, but find our commonality. So with that, Hassan, we've heard a lot about indie labels and their related clubs and touring networks. And what does it mean right now to put out a CD in hip-hop? Are most artists self-releasing? Are they signing with indies? Or are they doing distribution, promotion deals? What's your experience working in hip-hop today?
Peace, everybody. God pardon me, I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit.
Well, get on close to the mic. Yeah.
Well, I'll speak from my personal experience. I was originally with a distribution company when I released my first album, but before that I had released 2 mixtapes, which is basically just a collection of songs thrown together on a CD that I sold hand to hand at shows. Basically, I didn't have a car at the time, so it really wasn't out the trunk of my car. It was on the train, it was in the street, it was wherever I was, out of my book bag. I got connected with a distribution company called Day by Day Entertainment. They released my first album. They had some internal problems, so I was released from my contract there. And I pretty much learned how to do it on my own. I connected with a company called CD Baby, and they helped take my music to iTunes and Amazon and a lot of the digital distribution companies. And since then, I've been releasing music. I guess I have my own label, technically, but it's pretty much just me putting it out there by myself. A lot of artists that I know in New York are doing the same thing. They're putting it out on their own. There are very few, a lot of the independent labels that used to put out in underground hip hop, especially New York hip hop, they folded or have switched over to different genres of music. Unfortunately, you know, we all get into the conversation, like just how you said about other musicians accepting hip hop as a form of music. Within hip hop, we have our own internal, like this style isn't real hip hop, or this and this and that. But popular hip hop right now is primarily a sound that's coming from the South. So a lot of New York hip hop acts are finding themselves unable to get through to major channels, or even on indie labels not getting picked up as much. So a lot of people are taking the even more independent route than being on an independent label, which is just being their own distributor, their own, like I have a lot of communication with stores all over the world. Like I've toured all over the world, so I keep communication with stores in the UK or Germany or any other place that they might reach out to me and say that they want to carry my music. And I think that we actually were speaking earlier, and the question was, has YouTube and things like that, where has it kind of killed the A&R departments in labels? And we've seen, like, you know, with the phenomenon of the internet, the playing field has been leveled a lot. If you have something and you find a way to get it out there to people, and there's a demand for what you have, you can get it out there almost just as much as the major labels can get out what they have. The only thing is they have the capital to do it. So they can blast more than you can sitting there on your computer by yourself, but you still have the ability to reach somebody who wants to hear your music in Australia, or someone who wants to hear it in the United Kingdom, or someone around the corner. So I think that right now for artists, on the level of what we've been speaking about organizing, it's important that we organize ourselves together so we don't have to settle for less when we actually do have to confront a major label or an indie label that wants to take the work that we've already done, that A&R that's disappeared has become us working on our own and putting our music out there to people and showing, okay, I've developed myself. I've developed my business sense, I've developed my music, I've developed, you know, my savvy, how I present my music, all the way down. Like, for me personally, I deal with everything. I do the liner notes myself. I'm sitting there typing up everybody's ASCAP information. I've taken the pictures for my albums, like the ones that I'm not in, obviously, but I think that it's very important though. Like for me, I know if I have sat with Def Jam before, and you had said something about, you know, they will put out, you know, radical music. I think that is to an extent. Like you look back, like Sister just spoke about Charles Mingus. Charles Mingus put out an album called Fables of Forbes, a record called Fables of Forbes, and originally Columbia wouldn't release the lyrics to that song because he was talking about Governor Forbes in Arkansas. And there's cases like in hip hop, you know, when NWA had "Fuck the Police."
Yeah.
Or Paris had his song about the president and things like that, where, you know, the CIA, and it's an extension of what happened with the 60s with COINTELPRO, that we're seeing a lot of that with hip-hop, because hip-hop is a very dangerous music. Music itself in this country, I was waiting for you to pull up the joints, so I see how much time I got.
You go on now. Go ahead.
With black music in this country in particular, our music has always been very, very dangerous, because the first songs that we sang were songs of freedom on the plantation, and everything since then has been a progression of that music. You know, if you look at the blues and you look at jazz, there was things in jazz like Duke Ellington had a song called Brown and Beige Fantasy. I'm sure if he had lyrics to Brown and Beige Fantasy, they would have never put out that song, because it was about, you know, white people going down to the Cotton Club and dancing with brown and black people. You know, and at that time, it was something that people didn't want to hear and didn't want to have out there. So then, you know, you move on and it progresses to artists like John Coltrane or Max Roach with the Freedom Now Suite, or even Motown with songs like Dancing in the Street or James Brown, Black and Proud. And we move on to hip hop, and I've sat there in a Def Jam office and them tell me, like, what you say, we're not gonna put out. They've told me my name, Hassan Salam, is not gonna be able to sell music to people in middle America, because when I was up there, it was like 2002, 2003, and they were just like, nah, we're not interested in putting out that kind of music. And unfortunately, with major labels, with hip hop, which I see is it's a difference with hip hop than with rock and roll or with jazz or classical or different world music, is Black Death is the main thing that major labels want to sell when it comes to hip hop. So certain artists, when they come up there, whereas back in the day, you might have a Public Enemy or Wu-Tang or Dead Prez put out certain songs that were about freedom and justice and equality and things like that. Today, it's not what they're interested in selling, so they're not gonna put it out. So a lot of the musicians do have to go the independent route, and they do have to not, and like I said, even go beyond that and go the self-sustaining route. I think we also would, one of the gentlemen had mentioned something about branding. And that's also something that I feel is really destroying music. Because me personally, I feel like music and business together is an oxymoron. Because if you're creative and you want to make music or any kind of art for that matter, I like to think, or I like to hope, that most of us get into this because we want to do something good. We want a better society. We want to uplift our people or uplift the world, whatever it be. And a lot of times, you know, business is just about sucking that world dry and taking away from people instead of adding on to people. So when it comes to branding and you have major labels, whereas I know in my neighborhood, if you rhyme or if you do music, the first question most people will ask you is, what label are you signed to? Before they even ask to hear your music. So that also diminishes what an artist can do on their own. It makes it more that these labels, it's almost like a plantation kind of system. Like if you look like a couple years ago in hip hop, every rapper had their own label, but all of those labels were still distributed by major labels. So it was kind of like, let's say, you know, artist A was on my label, and they actually blow up. They go platinum. The major's gonna snatch them right off of my label because, you know, they're gonna make sure my label, after a while, after we've developed all these artists, you know, there's a certain point that we won't be able to take them to. So once that contract is up, they're gonna snatch them from us. So I think even the organization that I think we need to think about even more importantly as artists is controlling distribution. Distribution to me is the most important thing. And it has to do with then we don't have to go to people who aren't artists, who can tell us, you know what, I don't like the way you play that. It's really not popish enough for what I want to put out. But we'll have people who might be able to understand our vision or see where we're trying to go with the music that we put out. And we shouldn't, you know, we can't be sectarian about it. We can't be like, well, you know, I don't play jazz, so I'm not going to put out jazz. Or I don't play rock, so I won't put out rock. We have to come together and that's where the organization comes in, on coming together on common grounds to try and put out our music, and then also make sure that we all can take care of one another through what we do. Can I say something real quick about I want to say something real quick about, I think it's dangerous. I believe that it's very, very dangerous if we let music get controlled by the state in any kind of way whatsoever. I mean, my man just came in, he was talking about film. If you look, films that were put out, all those John Wayne films around the time of World War II, America was putting those films out as propaganda for people. If you allow the state to put out our music, or anybody's, they ain't gonna put out my music. I can tell you that right now. They're gonna put out propaganda, and it's very, very dangerous if you take that away from people and you put that in the hands of an already proven corrupt government.
Interesting point. Questions before this evening is
Real quick, I think also, I mean, going back to what you said, they definitely also did it because it's easier to make money that way. If Sony wants to buy a punk label, and they're like, okay, we're gonna put out these punk acts, or a hip-hop label, we're gonna put out these hip-hop acts. It's a lot easier to sell it if it's still somehow associated with the people who created it, because then they're no longer, it's like, okay, the Suits come in and buy the hip-hop, so now instead of me selling you my music, you know, it's a guy that looks absolutely nothing like me, who's probably never listened to my music before in his life. So it definitely makes it easier for them to sell it. Now, for the, and it's then the brand that's already been established by that artist themselves is still gonna be out there instead of, you know? But I think it's very important if we look at even outside of music and even outside of union organizing. I won't claim to be, you know, a scholar on union organizing, but my mother was a child of the 60s, and my mother put me on to the Montgomery bus boycott. And she's always told me, if you wanna get something done and you have to be diligent about it. It's not like they just didn't ride the bus for a week, you know? They spent a year walking, carpooling, it takes a lot. So if people actually have to legitimately think, okay, if we're gonna try and change distribution, or we're gonna try and go after these clubs, you're gonna have to take a hit somewhere. And the problem is, a lot of us artists, especially in these economic times that we're living in right now, can't really afford to take a hit in that area if that's our main focus of income. So if we're gonna do that, then we need to actually try to find other venues besides these venues that we're gonna be boycotting to perform in, like this one right here, maybe, you never know. You know, but I think it's important that, you know, with hip hop, before hip hop came downtown, when hip hop was park jams, when hip hop was house parties, when hip hop and punk music and house music was warehouse parties, we have to start finding ways to actually organize our things to stay, just be like, you know what, we don't fucking need you. We could do this on our own, and it's important to do that with the music as well. Like, for example, with our music, we create this. This is us. We're artists. We're the ones. If there's no music, then there's no manager to manage shit. There's no label to sell nothing. There's no distributor to distribute anything. So we actually have to really look at ourselves and be like, you know what? We are the entity. We are what makes this move, and we actually have to stop accepting less than what we're worth. We have to really. That's the main thing I think we should try to discuss, if possible, first. Like, what is that minimum that we can accept? Just like you said, some venues pay nothing. That's their minimum, nothing. Yeah. Or some venues will be like, you know what, here's 20 tickets. Go sell these tickets, we'll let you play. So you paying to play.
Let me ask this. Thank you very much, Hassan. Thank you. Our last panelist, not the least certainly, is Matt Plummer. Matt is a versatile improviser, composer, trombonist. He received his music masters from New England Conservatory and works in jazz, salsa, indie rock, and contemporary classical music. He's been involved in self-organized grassroots musicians organizations since the inception of his career, including with the Coalition for Creative Music, the Douglas Street Music Collective, and the Musicians Union, the American Federation of Musicians. He's also the creator of a great new website that's, I guess, in the test period right now, which allows indie musicians to rate and report on situations in the clubs in which they perform. And he calls it Venuology. And hopefully this will be something that musicians can really utilize to help each other improve the situations. Matt, thank you for coming. So many questions to ask you. We started out in my first comments thinking about what is an indie musician, and I know that the question is so broad, but you do travel in a lot of different musical circles, and I'm sure that you must have had these conversations with your contemporaries about the idea of unions and unionism. Let's just talk about these organizing drives. I mean, what do you see as the potential for bringing indie music artists together in light of your own experiences? And go ahead and maybe just respond to that if you can.
Thanks. I think I'm not particularly concerned about what label we put on. I mean, for me, I'm basically just concerned about all musicians of all genres. So the indie label, I guess, is a useful label because it basically means people who are trying to do their own thing, I guess, is what you would say in a way, versus you wouldn't probably call like a classical, orchestral musician an indie musician. That probably wouldn't fit, but I would say what we're talking about is pretty much everyone else that doesn't have a regular employer. You could say freelance musicians, maybe. But I think one thing that's really struck me from this discussion is that there's something that's really unique to musicians as opposed to other workers. And I don't mean that in a superior sense. I definitely see musicians as workers, but I think most musicians don't see themselves as workers. And I think most of the blame of the fact that the indie labels or any other, or the clubs haven't been organized, unfortunately, I think it lies mostly in the musicians. I think most musicians are not concerned, their head's not in that game. And my question lately has been, what can we do to actually get people thinking about that more? And I think people are pretty savvy about business. I mean, to me, there's almost two different classes of work. I mean, as a trombone player, I play things that are commercial, and I play things that are sort of like projects, you might call it, which most people would consider to be non-commercial. So, I might be playing a salsa gig, and for that situation, I have like a minimum amount. I would never work for less than X amount for a night. Most people are pretty practical about that who are, full-time musicians. It's not really an issue. But I think the problem comes when you have your own project, or you're working in your friend's band or whatever, and you're trying to get your music out there. That's when people start compromising their economic situation, and they're saying, oh, well, I'm going to play at this place so we can get our stuff out there. And people aren't idiots. I mean, they're doing it for a reason, but I think the problem is that they're just not thinking about the long-term picture. And the other problem is, I think when we talk about these kinds of situations, there's almost no acknowledgement from people who are trying to improve things. Like, I'm not speaking of 802 or even a lot of locals in the union, but just from a general union sense, everyone says, oh yeah, we got to organize these areas, but honestly, I don't think a lot of these areas have been organized. I don't think anyone tried to organize them. I don't think the fact that they're indie labels has, the fact that the majors have outsourced their work into indie labels has any impediment to organizing those indie labels. We're still in the United States. I mean, labor law still applies. The outsourcing, I think, is a lot different when you're talking about going to a different country. So I think it's mostly on the musicians. The musicians need to have that awareness. So to me, the issue is building the awareness in musicians. And, Andy mentioned this website, which I've developed called Venuology, and it's a great project supported by the Musicians Union. It's in a test phase. We're just it's just starting out. We have maybe 20 people on it. And Claudia, I don't know if she's here, but Claudia Copeland from 802 has some flyers, which I was hoping we could hand out to anyone who wants it, just a little information about it, Venuology. But the interesting thing about that early on is that almost all the clubs on there, regardless of how much they pay or the conditions in terms of benefits or pay or anything like that, almost all the clubs get 4 or 5 star ratings. So people are saying oh yeah, this is a great place to play. I really love the vibe here. Tips, 5 stars, and that's what I think the interesting thing is. And I'm not trying to diss those people because I did that too. I'll play a gig and I'm a member of the Douglas Street Collective. Just joined a little while ago, and it's a really cool thing. Everyone puts their money together. It's a musician-run venue. you know, I pay a certain amount of money, and everyone basically rents this space, and we can use shows. We take 100% of the proceeds. We have rehearsals there, but we're paying for, you know, for cover. And it seems cool because it's our own project, and we control it. But somehow we have to acknowledge that aspect of the music industry, but also acknowledge that a lot of times those kinds of projects can suddenly become extremely commercial. And that's where the major labels will suddenly jump on it. I mean, obviously, a lot of these indie labels started out actually indie, and once they became profitable, once hip-hop blew up, then suddenly all these major corporations are saying, oh shit, we gotta get on this, let's take, you know, let's snap up this money. I mean, that to me is the real issue, is that musicians don't have the, a lot of musicians don't have the consciousness, but they do have the actual smarts about how to run a business. You know, there's all this talk about do it yourself. I mean, Hassan and Iqbal have started their own labels. Everyone has this stuff going on, and I think it's only one more step to go from do it yourself to basically a movement, a labor movement. But it's like, in one sense, you're focused on, you know, if someone's putting out their own record and they're making their own packaging and they're promoting it as a band, that they're focusing on themselves. And somehow there has to be a way to bring the focus further outward into the music industry as a whole, or at least the scene as a whole. So that's basically what I was just thinking. I have a couple other things I wanted to mention. I mean, I thought it was really interesting that Jeff said that rock tries to figure out what makes people angry. Because if you're talking about you know, the fact that musicians are, I would say, fairly complacent about in general, the conditions in New York anyway, at least in my community, a couple different communities I'm in, I would say that that's the key, is finding what makes people angry. So, you know, having thought about this for a while, the idea of sort of like a organization that's fighting for musicians regardless of union status, I mean, it seems like the thing to do would be to get as many people involved as possible and figure out what's making people really angry, and then making basically a list of all the clubs in New York and just compile what the worst offenders are, which the places that piss people off the most, the things that piss people off the most, and then just work from there. And I think you'd find that a lot of the things that totally rational things that make perfect sense that unions tend to push for, you know, are probably not the first things that musicians would go for, because people have their favorite clubs. You know, I mean, the first thing you say, that someone says, if you're like, oh, you know, this place really is mistreating people, and they'll be like, oh no, I love that club. It's a great place to play. So I think there has to be a building of taking the broadest things that are the most upsetting musicians, build on that success, and gradually build consciousness in that way.
Very much. I hate to end this right now. It's 10:30. We've been here for 2.5 hours. It's been an amazing evening of comments and ideas. Thank you all for coming. Before you give applause, and we should allow me to thank a few people here. Claudia Copeland from 802, Liz Mestris with the space, Kazembe Balagun, who spearheaded the outreach, McKenna Achilla, who did the groundwork for us. Thank you and good night, and please stay tuned for more events focusing on the indie music community. Greatly appreciated.